She thought she was searching for a paint swatch. Instead, she uncovered evidence that blew up her entire marriage. A hidden ledger. 6 years of secret records. Thousands of dollars lost in failed crypto schemes. And a husband who publicly acted like the provider while secretly living off her income the whole time. But the scariest part? He was preparing to take complete control of her finances. This story starts with one toxic sentence and spirals into a psychological and financial nightmare.
That's it. I'm handling our finances now. Ethan's voice sliced through the air just as I'd landed a massive hotel design contract. He claimed I was reckless with our money. Humiliated in front of my assistant, I simply nodded. That night, looking for a dinner recipe on his phone, a calendar alert popped up. A consultation at a high-end jeweler with a woman named Chloe. My blood ran cold. This secret life he was funding shattered everything I thought we were building together. "I'm taking over the money," he'd said, standing in our half-renovated living room. My dream project. My hands, holding the design plans, didn't even tremble. They didn't show the seismic shock that ripped through me as I replayed the last 5 years. How I had downplayed my success to soothe his fragile ego, not realizing I'd slowly erased myself. Before we go on, thank you for being here, where we share these kinds of important stories. If you believe in recognizing all forms of labor in a partnership, please subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more people. Now, back to the disaster in my living room. He stood there in a designer tracksuit, the kind that screams lifestyle guru but has no actual lifestyle paid for by me. He was just watching me, ready for a fight. I could see he had a whole speech prepared, one he'd likely practiced to convince himself he was the smart, strategic one. I wasn't even sure what fantasy he was protecting us from. "From now on, I manage it all," he said, his voice swelling with confidence in my silence. "Your earnings go into an account I control. You'll get a weekly allowance. It's for our future. Our future." The words felt like poison. I carefully rolled up my fabric swatches and met his gaze. "Okay, Ethan, if you think that's what's best." He just stared at me. This wasn't part of his plan. He was ready for me to fight, to defend my role as the owner of my own firm, to list my accomplishments. He needed me to argue so he could call me emotional and justify this hostile takeover of my life. "Seriously?" He actually took a step back, totally caught off guard. "Just like that. Just like that," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "We can handle it this week. You can have full control." Relief washed over his face. So raw and immediate it was almost comical. "Good. Great. It's the right thing to do." He turned to leave, but couldn't help getting in one last dig. "Maybe now we can start building a real legacy." Then he was gone, off to some networking event, another hobby I was apparently funding. I stood there smelling paint and plaster, and something else burning our marriage, the flames finally reaching the rafters. My reckless spending. I looked around the room I had designed and was paying for entirely myself, to the vintage Italian sofa I found at an auction, the custom lighting fixtures I got a huge discount on, the paintings from a local Austin artist I supported after Ethan said we couldn't afford art right before he spent $3,000 on a branding retreat that led to nothing. This room, this house, our life. I had designed it, funded it, and paid for it, while Ethan posted inspirational quotes about his journey to a handful of followers. I picked up his phone, my tired face reflected in the dark screen. When did I start looking like a guest in my own home? When did these shadows under my eyes become a permanent feature? Then I remembered the calendar. I tapped it open, and it all spilled out. This wasn't just a schedule, it was a financial diary. Page after page, with meticulous notes, laid out the last 5 years of our marriage. Mortgage payments, Maya's commission. Vacation flights, Maya's bonus. The entire renovation cost. Marza's savings. That guy's trip to Miami he swore a client paid for. $8,000 on my American Express. His brand expenses were a tragic comedy. Website fees, podcast subscriptions. A $4,000 camera for content he never made. A designer wardrobe to maintain his image. His so-called investments in one failed online course after another were staggering, all quietly paid for by the profits from my design firm. I opened a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying. It was cold, clean, and unforgiving. Date, item, amount, source. Year 1 appeared. My contribution to our life, $90,000, Ethan 0. Year 2, I put in $120,000. He spent $5,000. Years 3, 4, and 5 told the exact same ugly story. My income exploded after I launched my own firm. His contributions were a fantasy, while his spending was very real, and all covered by me. The grand total made me feel sick. My total input, over $600,000. Ethan's, a net loss of more than $15,000. I had bankrolled over 100% of our life for 5 years, while he called me financially careless. While he built his influencer delusion on the foundation of my work, I wasn't his partner. I was his sole financial backer. I was his safety net, his sponsor, his personal bank, and his only stream of revenue, all rolled into one tired woman, and he had the nerve to put me on an allowance. I named the spreadsheet Ethan's Brand Funding and saved it everywhere: the cloud, an external drive, and a tiny USB stick I hid away. I leaned back, the damning figures glowing in the dark. This was undeniable proof. This was power I never asked for, but now couldn't live without. My job taught me one thing. A solid foundation plan always beats a pretty but empty design. He could spin any story he wanted about his brilliant vision and my reckless habits. But numbers don't have an ego. Numbers don't lie to make you feel important. I thought about landing the cover of a major design magazine last month, a huge feature on my latest hotel project. It brought in a wave of new, high-paying clients. I had rushed home, bursting with the news, ready to book a celebratory trip to Italy. Maybe we could finally afford that dream property in the hill country. But he'd only glanced up from his phone and said, "Cool. That'll help the brand's cash flow. Not congratulations, I'm so proud of you. Not this is amazing, honey. Just a cold, detached calculation of how my success could serve his own narrative. I tried to tell him about the famous clients I'd be working with, the creative opportunities. He just grunted, his eyes already drifting back to social media. He dismissed my career milestone with the chilling indifference of someone who sees their partner as a resource, not a person. And still, I made his favourite dinner that night. I made the pasta from scratch. I opened that expensive bottle of wine we'd been saving, desperately trying to manufacture a celebrity. He ate while scrolling through his phone, muttering about authenticity and scaling his audience. Watching him, I felt something inside me just snap. It wasn't a crack, it was a clean break. The life we had built wasn't just broken, it was a total fraud. I told myself that funding his passions was support, but it was really the slow-motion demolition of my own self-worth. My sister Chloe asked me last week if Ethan was my husband or my most demanding client. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" I'd asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, you're always funding his next big thing," she said, editing his blog posts, talking him off a ledge when a collaboration falls apart. "My friends who run actual businesses get less support from their partners," she added. I deflected, saying that visionaries just need extra help. But her words echoed in my mind. When did I become his unpaid business consultant instead of his wife? When did managing his fragile ego become my full-time job? When did I stop being his partner and start being the silent investor he took for granted? The answers were all right there in the glowing spreadsheet. 5 years of my net worth climbing while his debts secretly mounted. A slow, steady destruction of my self-respect until I forgot I was even supposed to have any. I snapped the laptop shut. The living room was a ghost of the celebration I'd planned before Ethan's financial power grab. We were supposed to host a dinner for a potential new client tomorrow night. Another event I'd have to plan. Another meal I'd have to pay for, cook, and then clean up after. Another performance of the perfect Austin power couple, where I did all the work and Ethan showed up to talk. I pulled out my phone and went to our group chat. "Hey everyone, so sorry, have to cancel the lake trip this weekend. Something important came up. The responses came flooding in "no problem" and "hope you're okay." Then I texted Ethan, who was probably charming someone at an overpriced Austen bar on my dime. "Lake trip is off. We need to set up those separate bank accounts you wanted. I'm free on Saturday to do it." His reply was instant. "Awesome. Let's get it done." I grinned at the phone. He had no clue what was really about to happen. Separate meant I was done being his angel investor. No more designer clothes, fancy dinners, or paying the bills for his ridiculous influencer fantasy. He didn't grasp what splitting things 50-50 actually meant. He was about to be responsible for half the mortgage on our downtown Austin condo, a place he could never afford alone. Half the utilities he ignored, half the groceries he never bought. He had no idea his perfect life, a life he credited to his own artisan vision, was about to implode. Because I was done being his silent partner, his angel investor. Done funding his ego while he dismissed my career achievements with a condescending smirk. Leo wanted separate finances. Well, he was getting his wish, and he was about to find out the real price of my support. The spreadsheet glowing on my screen was the unvarnished truth in hard data. I sat in the dark, watching 5 years of our marriage get reduced to a set of cold, hard facts. Every year told the exact same story. My salary as an architectural designer went up and up. Leo's income was a flat, pathetic line, maybe $1,500 a month, when he wasn't buying new tools. I created a new tab. I called it Chrome and Pipe Dreams. That was for his custom motorcycle shop, the grand project he'd been pursuing for 2 years while I built our actual life. The total I had poured into it was $68,000. For welders, vintage frames, chrome plating services, custom leather seats, and trips to inspiration bike shows in Sturgis. The total it had earned back was $4,100. I just stared at the screen. $4,100 in 2 years. That's less than $200 a month. It barely covered the specialized ventilation system he claimed was a non-negotiable business expense. The numbers made me nauseous. For every dollar his bike shop made, I had invested nearly $17 just to keep the lights on. This wasn't a business. It was a money pit of a hobby that I was bankrolling. I opened another tab, Unpaid Labor. This one hurt. It was all the things I just did, the chores that I stopped even thinking of as work. Grocery shopping and meal prep, 8 hours a week. Cooking, another 10. Cleaning, 6 hours. Laundry, 3 hours. Handling all the bills, appointments, and home maintenance, at least 4 hours. That's a grand total of 31 hours a week. At $50 an hour, much less than a household manager, that's $1,550 a week. That over $80,000 a year in work I was never paid for. When you add that to his business losses, my annual contribution was easily over $170,000. Leo S. was maybe $18,000 if he had a good year. Just then, my phone lit up. A text from Leo, out with his buddies. "Gonna be a late one. Don't wait up." I sighed and did the mental math. He and his friends loved those trendy spots on 6th Street, where one craft cocktail costs $18. He'd have 5 at least, plus some expensive tacos. $120. Gone. All on the joint card I was about to cut in half forever. Soon, the finances would be separate, and Leo's nights out would be his own problem. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and the living room went dark. Outside, the sounds of a warm Sunday evening in Austin drifted in a distant guitar, a neighbour's dog barking. But inside it was dead quiet, and I felt something new. Not joy, not yet. It was clarity. A sharp, cold understanding of the man I married versus the illusion I'd been supporting. Monday morning arrived with the thick, humid air of an Austin sunrise, making the sky feel heavy and wide. I was up at 6 a.m., as always, but this morning I made coffee for one. I grabbed my favourite mug, a piece of local pottery I'd bought on South Congress. Leo had claimed it months ago, saying it had the perfect heft for an espresso, which really meant this is mine now. I'd stopped fighting those tiny battles ages ago. It was just simpler to let him win, to maintain the peace. But the peace was a lie. I just kept shrinking myself, piece by piece until I almost vanished. No more. I made my coffee slowly. I used the French press he always complained was too fussy. I ground the beans by hand. Each step was a deliberate choice. I also made a real breakfast for myself. Scrambled eggs with fresh chives and a side of fruit. At 7:30, Leo stumbled out of our bedroom, looking exactly as I'd expected. Hungover, entitled, and assuming his morning routine was ready and waiting. He stopped dead in the doorway. The espresso machine was off. There was no breakfast for him on the counter. There was just me, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, finishing my breakfast. "Is there coffee?" he asked. Not mad, just bewildered, like a kid who woke up to find the world wasn't built for him anymore. I didn't look up from my screen. "The coffee is in the cabinet. You know how the machine works." An awkward silence filled the room. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding, trying to make sense of it. "You didn't make any for me?" I finally met his gaze. "Separate accounts, Leo, it's what you wanted. Your own man, remember?" His jaw clenched. I could see him searching for a comeback, for some angle that didn't make him sound like a complete leech. He came up with nothing. He just grabbed a granola bar from the box I bought and walked out. I heard the front door slam shut. And then silence, a completely new kind of silence. It wasn't just clear anymore. It was light. It felt like hope. For 5 years, I was his producer, making sure the curtain went up on his perfect morning every single day. And the producer had just resigned. On my lunch break, I created one last spreadsheet, shared living expenses. This was the new reality. I laid it all out. Mortgage, $4,800 a month. His share, $2,400. Property taxes, $600 a month. His share, $300. Homeowners insurance, $180 a month. His share, $90. Utilities averaged about $600 a month. His half, $300. Internet, $100 a month. His half, $50. Condo fees, $300 a month. His half, $150. The monthly baseline to simply exist here was $3,290. That didn't include food, car payments, or any of his personal spending. This was just the cost of having a roof over his head. A cost I had been carrying while he tossed in his spare change and called us a team. I created a shared folder with automated requests for payment, a clean system where every single bill would ping him for his half. No emotion, just the numbers. The first request went out that Wednesday for the quarterly condo fee of $900. I sent the $450 payment request with a simple memo. "Hey, you're half of the condo fees." His text came back instantly. $450? What's this for? He honestly had no clue what it cost to live. He had never once opened a bill. I texted back. "It's half the HOA dues. This is how separate finances work. It's due by Friday." The 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, one word hit my phone, whatever. The money showed up in my account on Thursday. I could feel his anger through the banking app, no note, just the exact amount, transferred with silent fury. Perfect. Let him be angry. Let him feel a fraction of what I felt every time I paid for his next brilliant bike part, while he told me we needed to cut back on brand name groceries. 2 weeks into our new system, my phone buzzed. Isabel's name flashed in the screen, and my stomach twisted into a knot. Years of quiet criticism from the woman who raised a man who saw my salary as his personal business grant. Maya, dear. Her voice was like warm honey with shards of glass in it, the tone she used to get exactly what she wanted. "I'm coming over for dinner on Sunday. Leo mentioned you were making that incredible ossobuco again." Incredible? I'd have made it twice, both times because Leo had signed me up for a full day of cooking, without even telling me. I almost laughed, but I caught myself. "That's not going to work, Isabel. I won't be cooking dinner Sunday." The silence on the other end was electric, filled with the sound of a world order being shattered. "I beg your pardon?" Her voice went from sweet to arctic, confused, insulted. "Leo and I are managing our own expenses now," I said, my voice steady, the same one I used with difficult clients at the firm. "A big meal like that just isn't in my budget right now. You're welcome to visit, of course, but you'll need to sort out dinner." The line was dead silent. I could feel her struggling to compute this new version of me, the one who wasn't her on-call chef. But Maya, Sunday dinner is our thing. It's tradition. A tradition where I cook for 8 hours, and she praises Leo for being so clever. A tradition where he criticizes the cost of ingredients I paid for. Leo can cook, I said, my voice flat. Or you can get takeout. It's up to you. I hung up before she could reply. It was polite, it was final, and it was non-negotiable. I immediately opened my calendar and blocked off the entire day on Sunday. I titled the event The Reckoning. Just 4 days. 4 days until Isabel showed up expecting a gourmet meal and got a reality check instead. 4 days until the whole charade came crashing down. The week dragged on with that strange, quiet tension that comes right before a thunderstorm. Every casual question from Leo felt like an interrogation. Every simple salad I made for myself felt like an act of defiance. Every bill that arrived was just more fuel for the fire. When I walked in on Wednesday, the kitchen was an absolute disaster, and not Leo's usual mess of leaving cabinets open. This was pure chaos. Pots were everywhere, a smoky haze hung in the air, and I could definitely smell burnt sugar. Liam was hunched over his iPad, watching a video called Foolproof Duck Confit at Home. I set my laptop bag down and just watched. He was so focused he didn't hear me come in. It was that same intense look he got when he was trying to flip a vintage watch online, always chasing the big easy score. "What is all this?" I asked. He jumped, nearly knocking over a bottle of Bordeaux. My good Bordeaux, of course, not the cheap stuff we cook with. "It's a practice run," he snapped, immediately defensive. "For Sunday." I took in the scene. The duck skin was rubbery and pale. The cherry sauce was a black, sticky mess. A thin wisp of smoke was curling up from a skillet on the stove. "Need a hand?" I asked, mostly to see what he'd say. He clenched his teeth. "I've got it covered." I just shrugged and went out to the patio. I grabbed a glass of water and just listened to him lose a fight with a recipe that was way out of his league. 10 minutes later, I heard him swear. Then, the high-pitched scream of the smoke alarm. I went back in to find him desperately waving a dish towel at it as the pans billowed out black smoke. He burned the sugar. He dumped it into a red-hot pan instead of melting it slowly. The entire kitchen now smelled acrid and bitter, a scent that would ruin everything else he cooked. "You have to start sugar in a cold pan," I said over the alarm's wail. "It burns in seconds." He ignored me, just swatted at the detector with a broom until it finally stopped. I turned around and went upstairs to change. I heard the pan hit the sink, the angry hiss of water on hot sugar, and another foul word. An hour later, the kitchen was a war zone. Every single pot we owned was dirty. A fine dust of flour covered everything. Something sticky was now permanently bonded to the floor. The recycling was overflowing with packaging from the gourmet market. I saw scorched herbs, a ruined sauce, and a piece of duck that was somehow both raw and burnt. Liam stood in the middle of the wreckage, looking completely defeated. "Why is this so hard?" he muttered, talking more to himself than to me. "How do you make it look so easy?" I could have told him it's practice, it's putting in the work. You can't just bluff your way through it like an online auction. But I kept quiet. I just looked at the mess he'd made, trying to fake something I do for a living. He pulled out his phone and started typing. A few minutes later, I heard him. "Yes, a delivery for Sunday at 1 p.m. The grand tasting menu for 3, please." "Yes, the one with the duck on tray." "No, the address is correct." My mind was already calculating. The tasting menu at Auberge was $300 a person, 3 people, plus the private delivery fee, tax, and a 25% tip. Well over $1,000, easily. Money I knew for a fact Liam did not have. It would go on the same credit card he was supposed to be paying down after his last sure-thing investment went bust. He hung up and saw me standing there. "Mum loves Auberge," he said. Like that justified it. "I know," I replied. "I've had it delivered for her birthday for the last 4 years." His face crumpled. For just a second, he saw it another invisible thing I always handled. Another expense I would have quietly absorbed. Another part of his mother's life I was expected to manage so he could look like the successful, caring son. On Saturday night, I was on the sofa with a stack of cookbooks. I actually had a free evening, since I wasn't planning menus or managing Liam's social obligations. He was back in the kitchen. I could hear him moving around, cabinets opening and closing, plates clinking, the dishwasher starting up. Around 9:30, he came into the living room. "The delivery is confirmed for 1 o'clock, he announced. "Eleanor gets here at 1, so the timing is perfect." I just nodded, not looking up from my notebook. "I'm going to go ahead and set the table now, with the good silver," I said. "Sure." He stood there for a second, clearly expecting me to praise him for all his effort. I offered him nothing. I just kept sketching a new recipe idea. He went back into the dining room. I heard the custom cabinets opening, the soft clink of the expensive wine glasses he bought. He came back 10 minutes later. "Where are the cloth napkins?" I told him. "Buffet. Bottom drawer." I heard him fussing around again, playing the part of the perfect son for his mother's visit. I turned a page, a small, knowing smile on my face. Sunday morning was clear and sunny. I slept until 9, a small luxury, and brewed myself a coffee, ignoring his new espresso machine. I pulled on my oldest, most comfortable gardening clothes. It felt like the perfect day to finally replant my herb garden. By 11, I was on the patio, surrounded by soil and seedlings, when Sarah from next door came to come to the fence. "Morning, Chloe," she called, holding a coffee mug. "Looks like a big project." I sort of gestured vaguely, back at the house. Through the big glass doors, I could see Liam adjusting a floral arrangement on the table that was already perfect. "Liam's mother is visiting," I told her, yanking a stubborn weed. Sarah leaned on the fence. "Is everything all right over there?" She hesitated. "Mark said he thought he heard Mark is her husband, a doctor whose home office has a perfect view of our backyard." "What did Mark hear?" I asked, my voice totally neutral. "He said it sounded like you were having some intense talks last week." "Not fighting," he said, but strained. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay." I could have just laughed and brushed it off, smiled and said it was nothing, just a crazy week with a deadline. But I looked right at Sarah. She's a good friend, she knows people, and she knows when something isn't right. "We're in the middle of a business merger," I told. "A hostile takeover, you could call it." Her eyes went wide. "That sounds serious." I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. "It's really not that complicated. We're just finally being honest about who really owns the controlling interest here." Sarah just nodded, her face a mask of total understanding. I could practically see her connecting the dots, reading the true meaning of my words. "New terms and conditions," she repeated. "You mean financially?" "I mean we're living in reality now," I said. "A reality that is very different from the story Liam tells investors." Sarah's expression softened with empathy and then with a hint of solidarity. "Okay," she said softly. "If you ever need to talk or just want a glass of wine, I'm right here." She gave my arm a little squeeze and then headed back to her house. I tried to focus on my garden, but the herbs were just a colourful blur. I'd just planted a seed with my neighbour Sarah. I had a witness. Someone to see the perfect image crack just before it completely shattered. At 12:45, I went inside to get cleaned up. The dining room table did look beautiful. I had to give Liam that. Our finest china was laid out. Line and napkins were folded perfectly. The wine was chilling. Bags from Auberge, the city's best restaurant, sat waiting on the kitchen counter. Liam walked out of the bedroom in a new linen shirt, ready to perform for his mother. The perfect husband, even though our marriage was completely insolvent. "She's 5 minutes out," he said. I glanced down at my own outfit, dirty gardening pants, and an old t-shirt, my hair a total mess. "I know," I said, walking towards the stairs. When I came down again, in a simple silk top and jeans, Eleanor S. white Mercedes was pulling into our driveway. Liam puffed up his chest, preparing for his performance. I watched him from the living room with a strange clinical detachment. No nervousness. No impulse to help him sell his lie. I just wanted to see what would happen when his mother finally met the man he truly was. The doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. Eleanor was never a minute late. Liam pulled the door open. "Mother, you're right on time." She swept past him in a cloud of expensive perfume, her sharp gaze landing on me immediately. "Chloe?" Her voice could drop the temperature in a room by 10 degrees. I'd put up with that voice for 8 long years. 8 years of little digs about my blog, my cooking, my entire life. 8 years of failing to measure up for the man who was draining my business account. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you," I said, my own voice smooth as glass. She clicked across the hardwood floor toward the dining room and then stopped cold. The table was perfect. The silverware was polished. It was the very picture of wifely perfection, except for the huge stack of branded takeout boxes from Auberge sitting right in the center. Eleanor's face went through a whole cycle of emotions. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally, pure disapproval. "What is all of this?" Her voice was like a whip crack. "I thought you were making your famous duck confit." Liam, my husband, immediately went into damage control. "We wanted to treat you, Mom." I ordered from Auberge. "You love their food. You ordered?" She looked at him like he'd confessed to a crime. "Why didn't Chloe cook?" Her eyes snapped back to me, waiting, demanding an answer. This was it, the moment I had been planning for weeks. I strolled into the room, swirling a glass of wine, completely at ease, because, Eleanor, 5-star meals are no longer a free service in this house. "A free service?" she asked, as if the concept was alien. "Ethan wanted separate finances," I explained, keeping it light. "So now we split everything. Chores too. It was his turn for dinner, and he handled it. By ordering $400 in takeout, I let that number sink in. I could practically see the gears turning in her auditor's mind. "Ethan," she said, turning on him. "You spent $400 on dinner?" He fidgeted. "It's fine, Mom. It's not a big deal. The lie was pathetic." "Isn't it?" I asked softly. "Because your half of the mortgage is due on Monday. That's $2,400, plus $300 for the car payment. And another $500 for the credit card you promised to handle. That's $3,200, Ethan." All the colour drained from his face. Isabel stared, and her look wasn't disappointment. It was cold. It was calculating. "Ethan James," she said, using his full name. "What is she talking about?" His jaw just worked, but no words came out. He was caught. Her question just hung in the dead silence. "What is she talking about?" I watched him desperately look for an exit. He couldn't deny the math, as I just spelled it out. Getting angry would make him look childish. He tried to sound reasonable. "Mother, it's complicated. Maya is exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating at all." I cut in, my voice low but firm. "Your share of our monthly expenses is $3,850. Half the mortgage, half the taxes, half the utilities. It's all in our shared budget app." Isabel's entire demeanour shifted. Years of professional doubt just clicked on. Her face became a blank slate. When she finally spoke, her voice was the crisp, detached tone of an auditor starting a case. "Maya," she said, giving me her undivided attention, "and what precisely is your half of these expenses?" The exact question I knew she would ask. I set my wine down and met her gaze. "The same as Ethan's," I replied. "We split all household bills 50-50. It was his idea." Isabel's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "And your total monthly contribution is what?" I could have fudged it, made it sound better. But I was done with that. $3,900 for my share of the bills, plus my car and other personal costs. So it's about $4,800 a month. I let that sink in. I could see her mind working, trying to find the flaw in the logic she knew was there. "And before this 50-50 plan?" she finally asked. There it was. The question that would rip everything open. "Before this plan, I paid for about $8,000 a month. Ethan's average contribution was $600. The silence in the room felt thick enough to cut. Isabel just stood there, her face a storm of shock, confusion, and what looked a lot like betrayal. "That can't be right," she murmured, her voice thin. But she was a woman who lived by the numbers. She knew I wouldn't invent them. "Oh, it's right," I said, "and I have the household accounts right here if you'd like to see for yourself." Yes, Isabel replied, her voice sharp as a tack. I would. Ethan made a strangled noise. Mom, you don't have to do this. This is private. Ethan. Isabel's voice cut him off like a razor. Be quiet. I went to the bookshelf, pulled out a heavy leather binder, and set it on the table. I opened it. A perfectly kept record. I pushed it toward her. 6 years of bank statements, pay stubs, bills, receipts. Every last dollar was accounted for. Every single expense was itemized. Isabel picked up the binder like it was evidence in a major fraud case. And I guess it was. She flipped directly to the summary page with its charts breaking down our contributions by year. The pattern held for 6 straight years. My income paid for roughly 90% of our life. His paid for 10%. At the bottom, I'd printed the grand totals in bold font. My total contribution. $576,000. Ethan's $72,000. Isabel's hand had a tiny tremor. She flipped through the pages. Ethan's golf club dues, $400 a month. His business lunches, $600 nearly every month. His brand development section was the biggest. Custom suits, new camera gear, yearly website redesigns, business trips to Miami and Chicago. Every single charge landed on my credit cards, while he lectured me on being frugal. Oh my God! Isabel breathed out, almost a whisper. Ethan moved toward her. Mom, you have to understand. I needed to build my brand. And how much has this brand earned? Isabel asked, her eyes locked on the pages. Complete silence. Ethan, what were your total business earnings in the last 12 months? Still nothing. Around $5,000, I answered for him. Before taxes. Isabel's head snapped up. She stared at her son like he was a total stranger. It was pure humiliation. You spent, she flipped back a page, doing the math in her head, over $60,000 to make $5,000? You have to spend money to make money, Ethan pleaded, his voice high and cracking. It's all about image. Did you know? Isabel cut him off, her voice like ice, that Maya was covering 92% of your bills while you built an image that lost $55,000 last year. Ethan's face turned a painful, splotchy red. She makes more than I do. It was only fair. Then why? Isabel asked, her words slow and piercing. Did you tell me last month that she was financially irresponsible? Why did you insist on splitting finances if you were the one taking everything? His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom, she's twisting this. Am I? I asked calmly. Which part is twisted, Ethan? Which of these receipts is fake? Which one of these bank statements is a lie? He had no defense. Isabel slapped the binder shut with a final, hard thud. She looked at me then, and for the first time there was no judgment in her eyes. There was only respect. Maya, she said, her voice gentler. Can I see your office? The question was so out of left field, all I could do was nod. Of course. I led the way out, leaving Ethan standing alone in the wreckage. Isabel followed, not as a judge, but as someone who finally got it. My home office wasn't fancy, but it was efficient. 2 big monitors sat on a clean desk, flanked by stacks of project briefs and proofs. An entire wall was a whiteboard covered in campaign schedules and client notes. This was the command center for my graphic design business. Isabel walked around the room, taking it all in. She gently touched a stack of industry awards I kept on a shelf. She stopped at the whiteboard, her eyes tracing the names of the national brands I worked for. This, she said, tapping the board, this is a real business. She turned to me, her expression serious. My son built a fantasy. You built an empire. Her side of the fridge was full, organized, vibrant, and Mark's side? Expired milk, 3 energy drinks, and a box holding 2 slices of sad, cold pizza. That's all. No vegetables, no meat, nothing a grown man should eat. He lived like a college student, not a husband. Eleanor just stared at the stark contrast between their worlds. Then she closed the door and went to the pantry. She pulled it open, and it was the same situation, a sharp line right down the middle. My shelves were packed, organized, ready for anything. Pasta, grains, coffee, baking supplies, everything to make a house feel like a home. And on Mark's shelves, just 6 tubs of expensive protein powder. That was all. Different brands. Fancy flavours, but not a single other item. It was a perfect symbol of what he'd contributed to our marriage. Eleanor just stood there, staring at those shelves like they held the answer to a question she'd been afraid to ask. She then moved to the cabinet under the sink and yanked out the garbage can. It was overflowing. I'd left it that way since Saturday as proof. The trash told its own sorry story. Burnt chicken from Mark's attempt to cook, slimy lettuce, a bag of rice that was now a solid brick, and blackened garlic. He'd even let fresh herbs rot away. It was all evidence of yesterday's cooking disaster. It was proof of a man who never learned basic life skills because his wife always took care of it. Eleanor's face went from white to pink to a deep, burning red. She straightened her spine, spun to face Mark, and she screamed. It wasn't just a yelp of surprise, it was a raw, horrifying shriek that echoed off the kitchen walls and out the window. It was the sound of pure, unfiltered agony. The sound of a mother realizing her son was the exact type of man she'd destroyed in boardrooms. Through the window, I saw my neighbours' heads pop up. I saw Mrs. Ford look up from her garden. I saw Mr. Henderson stop dead on his lawn. Eleanor was shaking in our kitchen, one hand gripping the financial binder, the other the budget sheet. 6 years, she whispered, her voice totally shattered. 6 whole years. Mark took a cautious step toward her. "Mum, don't!" she snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare." Her voice was trembling. All her corporate poise was gone, replaced by a mother's raw fury. For 6 years, you let her support you. For 6 years, you used her money to play the part of an entrepreneur while she worked 60-hour weeks. For 6 years, you had the audacity to call her careless when she was the only thing standing between you and bankruptcy. Mark's face was white. "It's not like that." "It was exactly like that," Eleanor shot back. "The numbers don't lie, Mark. The ledger on the tablet doesn't lie. And this," she gestured at the empty fridge, the takeout containers, the overflowing trash, "this doesn't lie either." Through the window I could see neighbours drifting onto their lawns. The Millers, the Chens, even old Mr. Davies, who avoids everyone. Isabel's voice had been a shockwave, and now they were on our driveway, phones up, their screens glowing in the dusk. I could almost hear the neighbourhood group chat exploding. Isabel looked at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "Nina," she whispered, "I am so terribly sorry." Her words were full of regret, but I could feel a bigger storm was about to break. She stared right at me, her expression pained. "I had no idea," she said again, her voice unsteady. "If I'd only paid attention." "You couldn't have known," I answered, fighting to keep my own voice calm. He is brilliant at spinning a false narrative. But Isabel just shook her head, looking at the spreadsheet as if it were a death sentence. "Was he really hiding it?" she asked, her voice growing stronger. "Or did we both just choose not to see?" That question struck me like a physical blow. She was dead right. Leo hadn't concealed a thing. I was openly financing his life, paying for his writing career from my company's account, and running our entire household for all to see. Isabel saw everything. The big dinner parties I threw, the spotless house I maintained, the expensive gadgets I bought that Leo would show off as gifts from us both. She saw it all and kept quiet because the reality was just too ugly. A wife supporting her husband just didn't compute with her version of the world. Asking would have meant admitting her son wasn't the man she believed he was. "I saw you," Isabel went on, her voice finally breaking. "I saw you do it all, the cooking, the cleaning, the constant work. I saw Leo contribute absolutely nothing, and I told myself you were just a Wonder Woman, that you liked being in charge, that you were happy." She covered her mouth as the first sob escaped. "But you weren't happy, were you? You were exhausted. You were being used. And I enabled it, praising you for being so competent instead of calling him out for being a leech." Outside, the neighbours hadn't budged. They were a small crowd on the lawn and sidewalk, phones still aimed at our house. I saw Jenna Miller edge closer to the kitchen window. Her face wasn't judgmental, it was one of startling recognition, of a shared secret. How many others saw what Isabel saw? How many knew our marriage was a performance, but just looked the other way? Isabel pulled herself together, wiping her eyes. When she looked at me again, her entire demeanour had shifted. "Nina," she said, her voice now firm with the authority of a lifelong accountant. "What do you need from me?" The question stunned me. I had braced myself for every possible reaction today, but an offer of backup from the one person I was certain would defend her son to the death was not one of them. I glanced outside at our audience, watching this family drama unfold. "I need you to acknowledge this is real, and to say it out loud," I said, my own voice finding its strength. "That's it. Just bear witness to the truth." Isabel gave a single, sharp nod. Then she turned to Leo with a look that could freeze fire. "I'm booking a suite at the Four Seasons tonight," she announced, her tone pure ice. If I come back, you had better be prepared for a radically different conversation about this marriage and your role in it." She held the tablet under her arm like a shield and marched to the door. Leo finally found his voice. "Mom, wait!" "No." She didn't even turn around. "You have shamed yourself, Leo, in front of your wife, in front of our neighbours, and in front of me. I suggest you sit with that for a good long while. You need to feel the weight of what you've done." She pulled the door open and strode onto our front lawn, right into the crowd of at least 15 onlookers. The silence was absolute. Isabel walked straight through the crowd like she owned the street, head high, shoulders back, the damning tablet in plain view. Our neighbours literally parted for her. I saw Jenna reach out and briefly touch Isabel's arm as she passed a quiet gesture of solidarity. I couldn't be certain. Isabel got into her dark grey Audi and drove off without a backward glance. For a moment, nobody moved. The neighbours stood there, stunned, trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. Then, slowly, they started to disperse, but I saw their faces. Jenna gave me a look that felt like pure respect. Mrs. Chen next door seemed lost in thought, as if she were re-evaluating something in her own past. Even Mr. Davies gave me a brief nod before turning back to his house. They all heard Isabel's raised voice. They came expecting a fight. What they found was something far more profound. It was a public reckoning with the truth, a truth declared so loudly it could never be unsaid or denied again. Leo and I were left alone in our kitchen with $180 of uneaten catering on the dining table. "You set this up," Leo said at last, his voice hollow. "You wanted this to happen." I just looked at him. I really saw the man I'd married 6 years ago, the man I'd championed and financed and built my whole life around. And this was the man who had somehow decided that I was the one with the problem. "I just told the truth. That's all. The explosion that followed is all on you." "My mother-in-law gasped," he said, as if I hadn't been standing right there. "She saw the numbers in her own office, and now the entire family is going to find out." I finished his sentence. "Yes, they will. They'll know the secret you've kept for 5 years. They'll know who really paid for your novelist career." His face turned a splotchy, ugly red. "This is insane. You're making me out to be what?" I cut in. "The man who brought in $52,000 in 5 years while I made $410,000? The husband who demanded separate finances while I paid for everything? The man who called his wife a spendthrift while she covered every single one of our bills?" He said nothing. "The bank records don't lie, Leo," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Your mother knows that. She's a retired accountant. She spent her entire career untangling these exact kinds of financial deceptions for her clients. Financial abuse, hiding in plain sight. And she just saw it up close with her own son." "Don't call it that," Leo snapped. "It wasn't abuse. I wasn't trying to, weren't you?" I fired back. "You called my design agency a cute little business. You said I needed to be more responsible with money. Just last week you told me you were tired of carrying us financially." I pointed to the stack of invoices on the counter. "Every criticism was a confession, Leo. Every single dig you took at my business was about your own failure." He stared at the loan agreements like he couldn't read them. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice a whisper. I thought of the new client proposals on my desk. Now, you pay your half of the mortgage on the first. You buy your own food, you make your own dinner, you run your own life. You finally figure out how to be an actual partner, not a child. And us? His voice was so small it was almost gone. I looked at him, slouched in his mother's expensive armchair. The artist I had supported for 5 years, the man who couldn't cover his own car payment. I don't know, I said. I honestly have no idea. But I do know this: I am done being your safety net. I am done being your patron. I am done funding this creative fantasy while my real-world business gets treated like a hobby. Leo's phone buzzed once, then again. A string of texts lit up the screen. He snatched it up. His eyes flew across the words, and all the colour drained from his face. "What is it?" I asked. "It's my mom," he said, his voice cracking. He passed the phone to me. It was a single, devastating message from Isabel. It had to be. I saw her storm out of the house earlier, her face like a thundercloud, without another word. "What did she write?" I asked, suddenly curious. Leo just shook his head, looking like he might be sick. He muttered, "She's disgusted. She said she told me I've become a textbook case of narcissism." He couldn't even finish. He just shoved the phone at me. I read the text from Isabel. "I have spent my entire career showing people how to escape financially abusive partners, and you have made a complete mockery of my life's work. You used her, Leo. You called it a partnership when you were a parasite. I don't know the man you've become." Then a new text appeared from Jenna, our neighbour and Isabel's friend. Isabel just called me, sobbing. "Nina, I am so incredibly sorry. We had no idea. Leo told Mike your agency was failing and he was keeping you afloat. He said you were terrible with money. My God, we believed him." I saw another forwarded message from a friend down the block. "He's exactly the kind of man his accountant mother always warned her clients about. The irony is just staggering." Jenna's text was brutally simple. "Clara, if you see this, we finally get it. We should have paid attention sooner." I showed the phone to Leo. He looked sick. His mother told her, "Now everyone will know everything." "Yes," I said. "They'll know the truth. That's what you get for building a life on someone else's foundation. The whole thing eventually crumbles." He stared at me, completely baffled. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman who's done being your silent partner," I told him. "The woman who remembered her designs are worth millions. The one who got tired of being called a liability by the man whose life she was funding." I walked right past him and out the door. "Where are you going?" he yelled. "To my studio," I said. "To my drafting table. To actually get some work done. To be in my own space without having to manage your massive ego." "This isn't over," he threatened, but it sounded pathetic. "No," I said. "It's not. But the game has changed, and we are never going back to the way things were." I drove across Chicago straight to my design firm. Hours later, I heard Leo get back to our loft upstairs. I heard the panic in his voice on the phone, probably calling his mother, who I bet wasn't picking up. I heard him pacing, opening the empty fridge again and again. Outside, Chicago lit up, and our friends were starting to talk about Sophia's public embarrassment, about the lie that had finally been exposed for everyone to see. I sat at my desk, reviewing the blueprints for the new tower project. Tomorrow, Leo would have to find a way to pay his share of the mortgage he never thought about. He'd have to buy groceries and figure out how to cook. He'd have to face our friends, who now knew he was a complete fake. But tonight, in my quiet office, I felt something new. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't revenge. Just the simple relief of a lie finally being over. The silence in our loft later felt weird. Not safe. Just empty. Like a building gutted to the studs, where all the hidden cracks are exposed. I lay in bed for hours, watching shadows, listening to Leo bumping around downstairs. I heard the crinkle of delivery bags, the cheap sound of a plastic fork, the fridge opening and closing. Then, nothing. Just after midnight, the floorboards creaked. He stopped right outside our bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting. Was he going to beg? Apologize? Try to blame me for his humiliation? The footsteps moved on, down the hall to the spare room. The door clicked shut. I finally exhaled, rolled over, and pulled the covers tight. My bed, my room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was sleeping next to a stranger. Monday morning was cold and rainy. I was up at dawn, making a single cup of coffee, getting ready in my own bathroom without worrying about waking Leo. He was in the guest room, a separate entity, already on his own. I left for the office at my usual time. Jenna was by the mailboxes at the end of our drive. She tried to act casual, but she was definitely waiting for me. When I stopped, her face was a mix of things. Pity? A little bit of morbid curiosity. "Clara," she said, her voice low. "Can we talk for a second?" I put the car in park but left it running. Of course. She glanced back at our condo, then looked right at me. "What Sophia said about you funding his entire life. Is that true?" I could have let her off the hook. Said it was just family drama, that his mom was exaggerating. But instead, I gave her the unvarnished truth. Every last word of it is true. Jenna just deflated. For how long? For the last 5 years. She let out this sound somewhere between a gasp and a swear word. "Mark and I had no clue," she said. "We just assumed you guys always seemed so perfect, so successful." That was the issue, I told her. I made it all look effortless. So nobody ever thought to check if I was all right. Jenna nodded, the full weight of it landing. She's a CPA. She understood. She knew all about hiding numbers and secret debt. "If you need help," she said, grabbing my arm. "I mean it. Anything. Mark and I are here for you. We see you." That stuck with me all day. "We see you." Like I'd been invisible for years. At the studio, I threw myself into the new skyscraper proposal with a clarity I hadn't felt in ages. Client meetings, material sourcing, budget analysis. The work was demanding, fulfilling, and 100% mine. No one at my firm ever doubted my business acumen. No one dismissed my achievements. No one would dare take credit for my designs. My assistant buzzed the intercom around 3. "Clara, you have a personal call on the second line. It's Sophia Rossi. She says it's important." I picked up the receiver. "Curious, Sophia R. It's Clara." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the faint tremble underneath. "I had to tell you this myself before you heard it from someone else. I just waited." "I've requested a formal review with the State Board for Therapists," she said, "about my own license, to report my failure to intervene, to report my professional and parental malpractice." I sank back in my chair, shocked. Sophia was the definition of professional calm and ethics. For her to turn herself in was unbelievable. "That's a huge step, Sophia," I said. "It's the only step," she replied. "I'm 63. My entire career is based on seeing these patterns, on helping families escape the kind of manipulation Leo mastered. And I let it happen with my own son. I let it go on because you were just so capable." Her voice started to break. "I used your competence as an excuse to ignore his failings," she continued. "I told you how amazing you were for managing it, instead of asking why you were the only one managing anything. We were both quiet then, connected by a line that stretched across the city of Chicago. Can I ask a hard question?" Sophia finally said, and I need your honest answer. "Do you think you and Leo can get through this, or is your marriage over?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I can't be that small again, but I don't know if Leo can actually change, or if he's just cornered." "That's fair," she said. "Totally fair. I told him he has to earn back every inch of this relationship. The pressure is on him to prove he's not that man." "And what did he say?" Sophia gave a short, bitter laugh. He cried. Got mad, then cried some more. "He's a wreck, Jenna, which is exactly where he should be." After we hung up, I sat watching the city lights. I kept wondering what Leo was doing. Was he reflecting or just panicking? Did he finally get what he lost? Or was he just furious he was as exposed? Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. Leo had sent $2,500, the memo. Mortgage, my share. I stared at the transfer for a long time. It was the first time in 6 years he'd paid his half without me begging. Thursday, $180 for utilities. Friday, $300 for groceries. Each deposit arrived without a word, no drama attached. It was just the money. His debts finally being settled. I caved and checked his social media. He hadn't posted since his parents' anniversary party Saturday night. 3 days without posting about his disruptive fintech was a lifetime for Leo. His last post was some complicated chart with a caption about his market insights, but the comments were all gone. Whatever firestorm hit after the party, he'd scrubbed every negative reply. His followers had plummeted from over 100,000 down to 70. People were fleeing his startup guru persona now that they knew his seed money was just my salary. That night, I got home to a clean apartment and a note on the island in Leo's perfect script. Cancelled the Bloomberg Terminal subscription. I'll use public data. 500 a month, not 2,000. Selling the standing desk online. Our first therapy appointment is booked for Tuesday at 5 p.m. We'll need to leave our offices a bit early. Signed L. There was no big dramatic apology, no rationalising, just facts, cold, hard accountability. I read the note 3 times, looking for the angle, for the manipulation. There was none. Just a man listing his actions, taking charge of his spending, and admitting they needed help. It was the most adult thing he'd done in our entire marriage. I folded the note and went to my home office. I opened the drawer that held the drive with all our financial files, proof of a 6-year partnership that was anything but. I set the jewellery store receipt beside it. Evidence of Ethan finally facing reality. And just maybe the first step he'd taken toward being a decent husband. That evening, I cooked for one. A perfect ribeye steak with roasted potatoes. I used our wedding china. I sat at our huge dining table, reading a book propped against the salt shaker. I was halfway through dinner when Ethan came home. I heard the lock turn, then his footsteps stopping cold when he saw me there. "Wow, that smells incredible," he said, his voice hesitant. I didn't bother looking up from my novel. There's another steak in the fridge if you want to make it. Just silence. Then I would even know where to start. "There are a million videos online," I said, turning the page. "Or there is a basic cooking class at the community centre on Tuesdays." More silence. I heard the refrigerator door sigh open. The sound of him rummaging for something, anything, to eat. The microwave dinged as he warmed up some leftover curry from a night I'd also eaten alone. He sat down at the far end of the table. We ate in silence, him scrolling through his phone, me lost in my book. It wasn't angry, it wasn't peaceful, it wasn't a fight. Just 2 people in a room, finally done pretending to be a happy married couple. "I transferred money for the mortgage," Ethan said to the quiet. "I noticed, thank you. It's a lot more than I realised." I kept my eyes on the page. "I know. I honestly have no idea how you managed all of this. The mortgage, the groceries, keeping this apartment clean, all of it. While you were building your own architecture firm." I finally glanced over at him. His face looked gaunt and tired. The stress was eating at him, or maybe it was just the effort of having to feed himself. "I managed it," I said simply, "because someone had to, because it became obvious you had no intention of ever helping." He winced, but didn't deny it. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix 6 years of..." He trailed off, looking for the right words. "Of me just taking everything. Of being a complete child. Of calling you materialistic while you paid for our entire life. I closed my book. You rewrite. Sorry is nowhere near enough. But it's a start." "So what do I do now?" he asked. "How can I possibly start to fix this?" I just stared at him. At the man I married who felt like a complete stranger. This man who was, maybe, finally waking up to the mess he'd made. "You become a partner," I told him. "You learn to cook a meal, to do a load of laundry, and to manage your own schedule. You stop treating me like your mother and start acting like my husband. You have to prove, with consistent action, not empty words, that you can contribute as much as you take. And if I do all that, then we will see," I said. "But Ethan, my life is no longer on hold while you grow up. I am moving forward for myself now. If you want to be a part of it, you have to earn that spot every single day." He just nodded, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Good, I thought. Let him feel what it's like to have no control for a change. Let him finally understand how it feels to be an afterthought for 6 years straight. Ethan finished his microwaved curry in silence. He put his fork down and looked at me, his face a blank mask. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Like, actually talk." "Are we talking right now?" I said, my gaze dropping back to my book. "No. I mean," he paused, and started again. Can we please schedule some time to really talk through all of this? I put the bookmark in its place and shut the book. When? Now or later? Whenever is good for you. The fact he asked about my schedule instead of just demanding my attention felt like a tiny step. Tomorrow, I said. Saturday afternoon after I get back from the site. He nodded, looking almost relieved I hadn't just walked away. The next morning, I took a long run along the Charles River. I ran past Mrs. Chen's brownstone, and she gave me a warm smile from her garden. Past the Davidsons, who offered a small, knowing nod. Even Mr. Gable from the corner said, "Morning, Maya." The same neighbours, who had seen the late-night car service pickups and deliveries from designer stores, now saw me differently. Not as friends, but as witnesses. As people who finally saw the real story. I got home feeling powerful, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Ethan was at the dining table with a stack of papers. He looked terrible, exhausted and hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. He'd definitely lost weight. His usual sharp, confident swagger was gone. Now that he wasn't spending his days at fancy lunches he could no longer expense. "Tea?" he asked, gesturing to the kettle. I poured a cup and sat down opposite him, and then I just waited. "I started trying to write a real business plan," he began. His voice was raspy, thin. "My father, well, he's just making me face a lot of the delusions I've been living with for years." I sipped my tea and said absolutely nothing. "He gave me a template," Ethan went on. "He told me to track my daily work activities and assign a monetary value to them based on what they contribute to the business." He slid a folder across the table. I opened it and saw pages of crossed-out schedules, frantic notes, and shaky diagrams. "I couldn't do it," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't assign a real value to my time because almost none of it creates any actual value." I glanced at his notes, at him trying to justify hours spent at networking events, on Twitter, on brainstorming sessions that went nowhere, on research he never used. 4 hours a day on brand building, he said. That's just for me. It adds nothing to our life but debt. 10 hours a week on social media, curating a founder persona for a company with no product. Maybe 1 hour a week, being generous, doing anything that could be considered actual work. He dropped his head into his hands. "Everything else is you, Maya. The income, the bills, the insurance, all the real planning for our future. It was always you." I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I called you financially irresponsible," Ethan said, his eyes red and swollen. I somehow convinced myself that was true. That your salary was our money, but my future startup equity was all mine. That you spent too much on groceries while I was investing in our future. He let out a dry, broken sob. "Your entire work wardrobe for the last 6 years cost less than my trip to that tech conference in Austin. My investments, the money from our savings, was over $80,000. To build absolutely nothing. I know," I said quietly. "I know you know, and that's what I can get past." He shook his head. "I am not the hero of this story. It was me. I was the entire liability. And I refused to see it until your father called me and laid out the entire disaster in front of me." We sat in the heavy silence. From the living room, the grandfather clock chimed 10, a normal Saturday sound. "So what are you trying to say, Ethan?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe just that I'm starting to get it, that I am trying, that his voice cracked. I'm so sorry. For all of it. And I mean it this time." I met his eyes. This was the man who called me unambitious while I paid for his dream life, the man who was finally seeing the wreckage he'd created. "Okay," I said, "I hear you." That evening, my friend Clara called. "Brunch tomorrow? My treat. We have to talk." We met at a crowded spot in the South End. Clara had a mimosa waiting for me. "I am just so relieved you finally see him for who he is," she said as I slid into the booth. I just looked at her. "You could have told me." "Oh, I've been biting my tongue for years, Maya," she said. "Watching you kill yourself at the firm. Watching you make excuses for him every time he maxed out another credit card. Then why didn't you say anything?" She gave a short, sad laugh. "I tried. A few times. Remember that weekend on the Cape 3 years ago when I said Ethan acts like a trust fund kid? with no trust fund, and I did. A fuzzy, painful memory. A huge fight that ended with me not speaking to her for a month. You told me I was just jealous, Clara continued, that building a startup is hard and he needed support, that a good partner doesn't micromanage. You said I was being negative. The memory came flooding back. I told her she did understand high-risk, high-reward ventures. I dropped it, Clara said, because you didn't want to see it. You had bought into this fantasy of being a power couple, that his success was your project. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But Maya, your worth was never tied to his potential. It was always about you. Brilliant, driven, loyal, and kind. You were the success story, long before he came along. Her voice got softer. He was the one terrified he'd never measure up, so he spent years making you feel like you were the one falling short. That single truth landed like a punch to the gut, and I started to cry. Right there in the middle of brunch, the messy, heaving sobs you can't stop, the kind that makes people stare. Clara slid into the booth beside me, wrapping a strong arm around my shoulders as I grieved for the future I thought I was building. I feel like such an idiot, I managed to say. You are not an idiot, Clara said, her tone fierce. You were hopeful. You were all in. You loved a man who exploited your loyalty. That failure is his, not yours. That afternoon, Ethan mother, Eleanor, texted me asking if I had time to talk. Just the two of us. We met in a quiet hotel bar in Chicago, far from anywhere we'd be recognized. Eleanor looked shattered. Her usual perfect armor was gone. All I saw was a sad, tired woman. I owe you an explanation, she said, after we got our drinks, for always taking Mark's side. I didn't say anything, I just waited. When Mark was a boy, Eleanor began, his father had an affair, a truly awful, messy one. For nearly a full year, our marriage was absolute hell. She drew a wet circle on the coaster. My own sister begged me to leave him, said he'd never change, that I was a fool to stay, but I defended him, I fought for us. I didn't speak to my sister for an entire year. Eleanor looked straight at me. Mark's father and I, we worked on it. He ended the affair. He pleaded for forgiveness. We actually grew stronger. So I told myself that my decision was the right one. She took a long, slow breath. Watching you, I see now that I was just trying to make your story fit my own past. I needed my son to be his father. I needed you to forgive him to prove I was right all along. So I blinded myself to what was happening. What was the difference? I whispered. Between them? Eleanor's eyes were like steel. His father made one terrible mistake, she said, and he was truly ashamed, disgusted by what he'd done. He spent the next 30 years proving he was a better man with his actions, not just his apologies. She met my gaze. Mark isn't sorry. He's just sorry he was exposed. He wasn't making a mistake. He was living a double life and letting you carry all the weight of his lies. There's a huge difference between a moment of crisis and a long-term pattern. The rage I'd held for Eleanor simply vanished. What your father-in-law and I have now, she added, is built on a foundation of painful honesty. We're a partnership. Her voice trembled. What you have with my son is a stage play, and I am so deeply sorry that I chose to be part of the audience. I'm sorry I didn't shield you the way I always shielded my son. Her hand gently covered mine. I made excuses for his anger. I never doubted his business trips. I told you that you were being overly emotional instead of asking you why you were so unhappy. I made you think you were going crazy for suspicions that were 100% correct. We sat in silence for a moment. What are you going to do now? Eleanor finally asked. I have no idea, I replied honestly. A baby is on the way. That is my grandchild, Eleanor said firmly. No matter what you decide, I am on your side from now on. Yours and the baby's, without question. She was the last person I ever expected to have in my corner, but the one I needed more than anyone. A mother who finally chose her daughter-in-law over her own child. That night I stood in the half-painted nursery, staring at the floor plans. My phone vibrated. A text from Mark. I told Jenna it's over for good. My first therapy session is tomorrow. My doctor thinks we could try couples counselling later, if you're open to it. No pressures. I promise. I read the message 5 times. Finally, I typed back, "I need to think." His response was immediate. "Of course. Take all the time in the world. I'm doing this for myself either way." I put my phone down and just looked at the empty crib. This was the friend group where our private nightmare had become public gossip, where Eleanor's switching her allegiance sent a tremor through the whole family. Things were definitely shifting. Maybe his apology was sincere. But was sincerity enough? I didn't rush my decision. Weeks turned into a couple of months. Mark kept his therapy appointments. He came home from work every night. He traded his convertible for a practical SUV, something a new dad would drive. That was a big deal for a man so defined by his status. He brought up counselling a couple more times. Each time, I just said I wasn't ready, and he always backed off. He never once pushed me. 6 months after I found out 8 months pregnant, I woke up to the smell of pancakes, not mix from a box. These were the real thing. I came downstairs and found him at the stove, carefully flipping a pancake. He was focused, almost like a surgeon. Measure the flour, whisk the eggs. Don't overstir, let the batter sit. It was clear he'd been researching this. "Morning," he said, not taking his eyes off the pan. "Morning." He slid a perfect stack of them onto a plate and handed it to me. I took a bite. They were amazing, so light and fluffy. The kind of food that says someone is actually trying. "I've been taking a night class at the cooking school," Mark said, almost shyly. "Just learning the fundamentals. I figured I should know how to cook for my family. You know, how to roast a chicken, how to make a proper soup stock." I just kept eating my pancakes, nodding. "I attempted that pot roast recipe last Sunday," he continued. "The vegetables were still a little crunchy, but it was close." "That's good," I said. We ate in the quiet kitchen, feeling more like strangers than a married couple. "I sold the sailboat last week," Mark said out of nowhere. "The money is going directly into a college fund for the baby." I had to admit, that was a pretty big gesture. "I also stepped down from the gallery's board of directors," he said, "and the charity. It frees up all my evenings. A father should be home for bath time. That's just how it is." He said it like it was a simple fact. No drama, just a statement. We finished our breakfast in a silence that was heavy with things we weren't saying. "Can we talk, please?" Mark asked. "About what we do now." I nodded. "Okay." We sat in the living room on opposite sides of the coffee table with what felt like a mile of empty space between us. "I have to ask you something," he started. "And I need you to be completely honest, whatever the answer is." I held my breath. "Is there any hope for us? Or should I have my lawyer start the divorce paperwork?" It was the question I'd been avoiding for months. "I don't know," I said, and I honestly didn't. Mark nodded, as if he knew that was coming. "My therapist says the affair was about my own insecurity," he said quietly. "That I built my entire identity on being the successful tech guy, the man with the perfect life, instead of just being a good person." He looked down at his hands. "She said I was using you as a prop, like if a woman as incredible as you loved me, then I had to be worthy. But I wasn't. I was just draining the life out of you." "Yes," I said. "It was time for absolute truth. You weren't just cheating on me, Mark," he admitted. "You were designing a nursery for our child while I was lying straight to your face, and I had the nerve to call you paranoid." His voice cracked. "I made you question your own sanity when you were the only sane thing in my life. And I don't know how to fix that, Chloe. I can't take back this." He stopped, taking a shaky breath. "Abuse. My therapist called it emotional abuse. I hate that word, but she's right." I remained silent, letting the ugly truth fill the air between us. "I'm not asking you to stay," he said, finally looking me in the eye. "I'm asking what you need, to be happy. And if the answer is a divorce, I'll sign everything. No arguments. I'll just leave. You deserve to be the one who decides." I stared at him. This was the man who'd dismissed my entire career as a cute side project. The man who was maybe, just maybe, becoming someone else entirely. "I need time," I told him. "Real time, not just a few months. I need a year, maybe even longer. I need to know this isn't just you terrified of losing your fortune in a settlement." Mark just nodded. "Fine. I need to see you hold a real job. Contribute to this home, and manage your own life without me as your secretary, fine. You have to stay in therapy, and we have to find a marriage counselor, a serious one, who can handle this kind of train wreck, not just teach us communication tricks. I'll start looking tomorrow, Mark said. I'll find a specialist in this type of betrayal. I took a deep breath. And you have to accept that if we make it, we are never going back to the way we were. I will not be your personal assistant anymore. I will not organize your life so you can take all the credit, and you will never, ever call me ungrateful when my design work is what paid our bills before your app took off. I understand, Mark said, his voice soft. I don't want to go back there. The man was... He searched for the words. He was an arrogant prick. Toxic, so unbelievably cruel. We sat in a thick silence for what felt like an eternity. Can I ask you something? Mark finally said, breaking the quiet. Go ahead. Why are you even considering this? After everything I put you through, why didn't you just file for divorce that day? I had asked myself that same question 1,000 times, because I have to know if a person can actually change, I said finally. Not just say sorry. Not just behave for a few months until the storm passes, but really, truly become a completely different person. I looked him straight in the eye, and because the man I married 7 years ago, before the money, before the ego, before this mess, that man was someone worth fighting for. I need to know if he's still in there somewhere. Tears welled up in Mark's eyes. I'm trying to find him again too, he whispered. That morning, 6 months and 2 weeks after that awful day, Eleanor came over for brunch, but this time it was like a different universe. Mark was the one in the kitchen, making everything. Just some fancy scrambled eggs and roasted potatoes. It wasn't gourmet, but it smelled amazing, and he was completely focused on getting it right. Eleanor showed up at noon, right on time, but she'd left the powerful CEO attitude at the office. She was in jeans and a nice sweater, with a real smile on her face. Something smells delicious, she said, giving me a hug first. Then she turned and hugged Mark. It's just eggs, he said. I tried that trick from a YouTube video. Let's hope they aren't rubbery. The three of us set the table on the patio together. Eleanor folded napkins. I set out the glasses and Mark brought out the food. The total reversal of our old roles was almost shocking. We sat down, and Mark's eggs were actually perfect, not just edible, but really, really good. The kind of food by someone who was actually learning and paying attention. Then Eleanor raised her glass of lemonade. Let's raise a glass, Evelyn said, looking from me to Liam, to facing the truth, to starting over, and to the messy, painful job of becoming who we're meant to be. Our glasses clinked. I am so proud of you, Liam, she said, her eyes welling up. Not for the buildings you designed or the awards you won, but for this. For finally admitting the damage you caused and working to repair it. That takes real character. Liam's throat was tight. Thanks, Mom. Then Evelyn turned to me. And Maya, thank you for setting boundaries, for refusing to be ignored, and for showing my son what a real marriage looks like. When dinner was over, Liam began stacking the plates. I'll get it, he insisted when I stood up. You made dinner, I said. Maybe, he said, but for the last decade, you did it all while I was building my legacy. It's my turn. Evelyn and I sat on the porch while Liam cleaned up inside. We could hear the clatter of dishes, the sound of him actually figuring out where things go in his own home. So, Evelyn asked quietly, how is he really? He's trying, I answered honestly. He's not magically cured, but he's trying. He's paying his own way. He found a new job. He's in counselling. He's learning how to be a partner. And what about you? It took me a second to answer. I'm okay, I said. I still don't know if this marriage can be saved, but here's the change. I'll be fine either way. That's what's different now. A year ago, I would have been destroyed if he walked out. Now, I know I can make it on my own. So if I stay, it's a choice, not a prison. Evelyn squeezed my hand tightly. That's the most powerful thing I've ever heard. Later, after she'd left, I found myself standing in the doorway of his home office, the room where everything shattered, where one dropped picture frame turned our private disaster into a family crisis, Liam came up behind me, leaving space between us. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For not leaving me in the wreckage that day. For giving me a chance to be a man you could respect." I turned to him. "Don't thank Liam. We're not fixed. We might never be. This could still end in a courtroom." "I know," he replied. "But if it ends, it will be your decision, for your own good. Not because I was too arrogant to realize what I had." We stood there quietly. The office where his mother had gasped felt different now. It wasn't an accusation anymore. Just a room where we were trying to find our way back. Some marriages end with a clean break. Ours was a slow reconstruction, one hard conversation at a time. But that sound, the awful shatter of glass, that was when the lies stopped. The moment his mother saw the real man she'd raised. And in our exclusive Boston suburb, where appearances are everything, the story of Evelyn's discovery became a quiet warning. It showed how the truth, when it finally comes out, can break more than just glass. But sometimes, in the wreckage, you can build something stronger. If this story of infidelity and the hard road to forgiveness resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. For me, the most shocking part was Evelyn finding that framed picture of the other woman. What moment stood out to you? Share your take in the comments section. And for more complex stories like this, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss an update.